Good afternoon and welcome to another online Wish event that we've got today. I hope you're all doing well and keeping busy during our second lockdown. I know we might all be thinking, when on earth is this going to end? Because I know that I am. And I just wanted to remind everybody that Wish is not just an organisation championing positive and like-minded women in the industry, but it's also a support network and provides us with the opportunity to connect with each other. So with that in mind, please do not hold back from reaching out to any of us board members with any questions that you might have or topics that you might want to discuss in the future, because we'd love to hear from you. What we've got lined up for you today, be bold, visualising where you want to be and having the confidence to get there. We have two fantastic speakers for you today. Firstly, Janine Green, who's an experienced public speaker, having chaired conferences, presented at large events and delivered numerous training sessions. And Kim Newman, Managing Director of PML and Chair of All Well Housing Association. Kim has 25 years experience within the housing sector and was recently a finalist for the Consultant of the Year for Women in Social Housing Awards. So the floor will be open for questions after each speaker has done their presentations and their little slot, which you can type in our chat function and you can find at the bottom right hand side of your screen. And please feel free to use that. I encourage that you do, just even to say hello, but add questions throughout and we'll be happy to reach them at the end after each speaker has done their piece. So yeah, to kick off our event, I'm sure you'll join me in welcoming Janine to the stage. So over to you, Janine.
Thank you. So hopefully I've achieved the first goal by unmuting myself and putting my video up. Now the second challenge is always to share my screen and get my slides up. So let's see how that goes. Bear with me a few moments. So Lauren, I hope you're going to tell me that you can see those slides. Amazing, thank you. So firstly, I guess just a really big thank you for inviting me along today. As I said, my name is Janine Green. My day job is that I work in antisocial behaviour, something that I've done for about 15 years. And I've worked for local authorities, managing antisocial behaviour teams. I have worked in housing associations. I was managing director of a national membership-based organisation that did a lot of work around lobbying government to change laws and legislation and policy. And about 2 years ago, I made the decision to go self-employed. So I probably spend roughly about 70% of my working week working with housing associations and councils, helping them to deal with antisocial behaviour. The other 30%, I do a variety of different things. I always say that when you go self-employed, you will literally do anything that pays you money because you are so desperate to make sure that you can pay your mortgage. So I do lots of things. I sit on tribunals, but also I spend time doing things like this. So talking to people about public speaking, doing one-to-one public speaking sessions with people. I'm a trained coach. It's something that I'm incredibly passionate about. So a little bit more about me in terms of my kind of public speaking experience. And I've got, hopefully if I can share, there we go, a few kind of examples of some of the things that I've done. So on the left-hand side of the screen, that's chairing a Housemark conference, giving interviews on TV. In 2017, I was really proud to be chosen as a BBC Expert Woman, which was part of the BBC's initiative to try and increase the amount of women that were asked to contribute to TV programmes, documentaries, etc. So I do talk on radio programming, I do often get asked to go on the news, etc. And on the bottom of your screen, chairing panels at conference events. I like to keep challenging myself. Almost 12 months ago, I did something that really scared me, which was stand-up comedy at the Glee Club. It was a charity event. I have never done stand-up before. I don't even think I'm that funny, but it was for cancer research, and it was just something, 10 weeks of training and an opportunity to really push myself out of my comfort zone. I would never do it again. It's always the question I get asked, is this your new career? And the answer always is absolutely not. But the reason why I tell you these things is not to kind of be smug and not to say, look at all these amazing amazing things that have happened to me, or, you know, not to be egotistical, but actually because what I want you to know is that for a very long time, and still now sometimes, this is really what I think about myself. So I still think of myself as being that 7-year-old girl that you can see in this picture, and that is me. You can probably guess from the Care Bears image on my jumper that that was kind of circa late 1980s, which kind of gives my age away a little bit. But for me, I've had to do lots of public speaking in my career. It started when I started managing a team. Certainly when I became managing director, there was a huge expectation that I would get up and stand in front of hundreds of people and promote the business. And for a long time, I felt incredibly uncomfortable doing that. I make no qualm, I'm always very open. I have suffered from imposter syndrome for as many years as I can possibly remember. And all I could think is that when I was up on that stage talking, everybody would be looking at me thinking, why is she up there? What does she know? Who's this young girl that knows nothing? What are her credentials? You know, what does she know? That's wrong. That's not right. That was all that I would think about. Not to mention the fact that also anxiety and panic attacks, and I would be in this frame of mind where I'd think that a panic attack was going to hit me at any moment. And for a long time, I actually didn't enjoy public speaking at all. I'm really pleased to say that now I really do enjoy public speaking. And as much as the nerves never really go away, I do actually really enjoy the opportunity of standing up in front of people and talking. It's been a hell of a journey to get me here, and why I now really enjoy working with women particularly, and sharing some of my experiences around public speaking, is that there are lots of things that I've done that have helped me to see myself now as a 38-year-old confident, capable woman, rather than feeling like 7-year-old little Janine that's on the screen in front of you. So this is, for me, amazing opportunity to share some of the stuff that worked for me. And perhaps I hope that some of my story, some of the tips that I share with you are going to resonate and are going to be things that you might want to take away and hopefully make a difference in terms of how you feel about public speaking and about how you present yourself when you're public speaking as well. So let's move on from this picture, because let's be honest, I don't want that picture on the screen for much longer. When I talk about public speaking, I always talk about 5 different things. And for me, this is like the magical jigsaw puzzle. If you can work on these 5 jigsaw pieces and bring them all together, then you're going to have a fantastic presentation. You're going to be a fantastic public speaker. And the 5 areas for me are, the big one is mindset. So I talk a lot with people about what are the things that you can do to help manage your fears and the concerns that you have about public speaking, and what things can you do to increase your confidence. Now, I'm going to focus quite a lot today on this section. I certainly haven't got enough time to go through all of them, but I'm going to focus a lot of today on the mindset element. What I would say is some of you might be sitting there going, I love public speaking. I can happily skip up to the front of the stage every day of the week. It doesn't concern me at all. I love it. I have to say you are in a really fortunate minority, because most people don't feel quite like that. But even so, what I hope is that some of the techniques that I'm going to be sharing with you, you'll see that they're transferable to any things that you might have fears around. So whether it's public speaking or something else, my hope is that you will get something from this, regardless of whether it's public speaking that's your concern or something else. I also talk a lot about your preparation. So if you think about this in terms of mindset and preparation, both those things happen way before you even step in front of an audience. So for me, if you're going to prepare yourself for a presentation or a public speaking event, you need to start planning for it way in advance. So there are things that you can do, your preparation around understanding who your audience is, making sure that your presentation is designed in a way that best connects with your audience. And I'll talk about why that's important. I also talk about content. So, how can we make the most engaging, entertaining content we possibly can? I talk about delivery, and we will touch on a little bit of that this morning or this afternoon. How can you make sure that you keep your audience with you? I have to say, there is nothing more frightening as a speaker when you look out on your audience and you feel like you've maybe lost them. Maybe they're looking at their phones, maybe they look a bit bored, stifling yawns, and you just feel like you've perhaps lost them a little bit. That can really impact on you and your confidence and really throw you off. So there's lots of things that we can do to make sure that that engagement is really strong, and that our audience are getting from us what they need, but also we're getting from them what we need in terms of that confidence to continue. It's why actually doing something like this is incredibly difficult as a speaker. And one of the things that we spoke about when we were having our kind of preparation talks was how webinars are really artificial, because I, at the moment, am staring at a screen that's got my slides on. I can see myself, which is really awkward. But I know that there's like 40 people behind the screen, but actually I can't see any of you. So I don't know whether you're with me, whether you're enjoying this, whether things are landing properly with you. It's really difficult because audiences give you massive cues, and we'll talk about some of that as well. I like to be optimistic, so I like to pretend that you're all sat there deeply enthralled, nodding along, vigorously at what I'm saying. There is that advantage, of course. And there are ways that we can manage our audience as well. So how can I make sure that I keep you along with me? What are some of the techniques that I can use to make sure you stay with me, that you don't zone out, that you're listening to me from the minute I start my presentation to the minute I finish? And as I said, we'll pick up on some of these things as we go through. So sadly, I haven't got enough time in 30 minutes to go through all of them, but hopefully we'll pick on some. So, moving my slides on, why don't people like public speaking? So the first thing to say is that I know that for most people, public speaking is one of the worst kind of fears in terms of anything we do from a business point of view. And generally, most people have this: I don't like public speaking, I don't like getting up in front of people. And there are a number of reasons for that. And just to speak through some of them. So there's a fear of going wrong. So perhaps of saying the wrong thing, and looking stupid is a big one when I talk to people. Anyone who may experience or have experienced imposter syndrome that I spoke about, this fear of being found out. Imposter syndrome is always this thing that you never think you're quite good enough, and you're always waiting for the day that somebody's going to uncover that you don't really know what you're talking about. So that fear of somebody asking you a question that you don't know the answer to, and then suddenly everybody's fingers are going to be pointing at you going, see, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Physical things like tripping over, if you're having to go up in front of people. Sometimes we get asked to speak in public because of in quite high pressurized situations, like a job interview. It's quite common these days that as part of a recruitment process, you're asked to give an interview. So not only have you, get asked to give a presentation. So not only have you got the pressure because you're applying for a job, but you've also got the pressure of doing it in a public speaking way. So that can be really, really scary. Some people don't do it very often. So it's literally a fear of the unknown. It's Wednesday, and this is my 4th speaking gig this week. I do it lots. And we'll talk about that a little bit as well. But for some people, it happens so infrequently. And of course, when we don't do things very often, the fear builds and builds and builds. And I think there's also something that some people have this fear of all eyes on me. I don't want everybody looking at me. It's just something I don't like. I am naturally an introvert. Everybody's always surprised when I say that, because I've learned to kind of project something that's otherwise. My natural is not to be stood in a room in front of people. And again, I tell you that because if you're sitting there thinking, I'm incredibly shy, this isn't something I can do, you absolutely can, because I am an introvert. I was so incredibly shy, still am. I find social situations very difficult. I would rather be in a room of 2 people than of 200. The thought of going to parties, going to networking events. I used to be a Wish board member for Wish Midlands. That networking time that we had before the session used to fill me with dread. Not my natural comfort zone. So if that's you, please believe that you can get to a position where you are comfortable and happy doing things like public speaking, because it is possible. So I want to talk a little bit about why do we have the fears that we have. So all those things that I listed, and I'm sure there are many, many more. There are probably things that aren't on that list that are the reasons why you're fearful of public speaking or get a bit nervous. Essentially, what I want you to think about is the reason why we get scared is because we're conditioned to think in that way. So it's a survival instinct. We think the worst about situations, and our bodies do that to try and protect us. If we think about something that scares us, like public speaking, and our body responds by creating lots of nerves, telling ourselves that we can't do it, that's our body's way of trying to stop us getting into the position that we're fearful of. So I want you to think of it in terms of that your body is actually trying to protect you from something that's scary. If you think about this picture that I've put on the screen, if you approach that field, I think it's somewhere beautiful like Vietnam, but if you approach the entrance to that field, you would walk down that beaten path. You wouldn't think twice about it. You would go down the path that's already beaten. And that's almost like how your mind thinks when you think about public speaking. So someone tells you that you're going to do some public speaking, you automatically go, I can't do it. It's not something I'm capable of doing. It's going to go wrong. I'm very nervous. That's your automatic responses. What we need to try and do, and it is possible, is create a new path. So what we need to do is to try and stop those negative thoughts, so that the minute we get to that field, we stop and we consciously make a decision that we're not going to think the worst about things, and that we're going to challenge those negative thoughts and create a new path which is based on positive thoughts. And it's easier said than done. I still do it now, and that's the other thing that I would say. Some of the stuff that I talk about, I'm still doing these things on a daily basis. It ends up being easier. So this morning, I haven't done this presentation for about 6 months because of COVID. This morning, little Janine inside me was punching me in the ribs, going, you can't do this. You haven't done this for so long. It's going to go really badly wrong. You're going to lose your way and you're going to forget things. But what I was able to do, that's my beaten path. That's my mind going down my beaten path. That's my natural instinct to think like that. But what I'm able to do now is stop those thoughts almost as soon as they start and challenge them. And go, you do know what you're talking about. You've delivered this presentation many times. Feedback is always good. You can do this. That's my new path. So these things we have to keep working on, and it's an ongoing process, but it's a lot less exhausting for me now to challenge those negative thoughts than it used to be, because of keep on at things, keep forging that new path for yourself that's a lot more positive. The problem that we have is that very often, well, always, the way we think affects the way we behave. So to give you an example here, a really common fear of public speaking is that we're going to forget our words. So we're essentially going to freeze up, we're going to forget what we were supposed to be saying, and we're going to look foolish in front of everybody. So when we know that we're going to do public speaking, again, our kind of instinct is to think negatively, and we keep saying to ourselves, I'm going to forget my words, I'm going to forget my words, I'm going to forget my words. That's our thoughts. The problem is, what this does is it affects the way we behave. So we then start to feel even more nervous than we would have done before. So I'm going to forget my words, I'm going to forget my words. Oh my God, I feel really nervous. I can't do this. My heart's racing, my butterflies in my stomach, my knees are shaking. I need to find the exit route. I need to get away. And the problem is then it almost becomes that kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, because what happens is that those nerves that we've created through our thoughts can actually lead to us forgetting our words. And then what you get is almost a completion of the cycle, because where we've been really nervous in a presentation, we then internalize that as evidence that we are as crap as we thought we were. So it just becomes this absolute vicious circle. So what we need to do is change the way we talk to ourselves and change the things that we are saying to ourselves. And there are a few ways that we can do this. One of the things that I talk to people about is about reframing the way they think about public speaking. So not seeing it as something to dread, but actually seeing it as something as positive. So the first thing that I would say is always think about, you will automatically, when you think about public speaking, you will think about the negatives. What I want you to do is start thinking about the positives as well. And almost like, you know, you remember that episode of Friends where Ross does that kind of pros and cons list when he's trying to decide between Rachel and Julie. It's almost that. Literally get yourself a piece of paper and write down what are the negatives of positive speaking, what are the benefits that it can bring, because I want you to start seeing that getting out in public is massively, massively beneficial. I can say without exception that all of the biggest opportunities in my career have come from someone seeing me talk. So I did quite a lot of work with the Home Office as one of their expert practitioners. That was because someone from the Home Office saw me talk at a local event. Obviously getting the work with the BBC has come from someone seeing me talk. Getting promotions. I got my first job in ASB. I had no manager experience. I was up against people who did have manager experience. And I know from the feedback that it was my presentation that got me the job. So I want you to really think about the power of your voice, and also to be heard, to influence, to make a difference. And it's so, so important, I think, particularly as women, that we're speaking up and making a difference. So always think about the benefits. Try and think a bit more positively about public speaking. See it as the opportunity that it really is. And also think about the fact, you know, is it nerves? Because, and some of you will have heard this said before, if you think about the way you feel when you're nervous, you know, butterflies in your tummy, adrenaline, they are exactly the same emotions and sensations that you feel when you're excited. So when you're excited, you also feel butterflies in your tummy. You also feel adrenaline. So actually thinking about the fact you probably are a bit nervous. I was a bit nervous. I'm always a bit nervous before I speak in public, but also I'm excited. And what I want you to realise is that sometimes distinguishing those two emotions is really difficult, but actually part of you is probably really looking forward to it as well. That sounds utterly perverse, and I get that. But I promise you, don't just think about your emotions and your feelings being negative, because you're probably a little bit excited as well. The other thing that I would always suggest to people is some exercises that I found have really worked in terms of me managing my fears and concerns. I always think that, as I said, we're conditioned to think the worst. So what we need to do is start kind of rationalising and start arguing against those worst case scenarios. If we think about anything in our lives, you probably, the worst thing that we thought could happen, the thing that we've dreaded, is nowhere near as bad when we've actually gone through it, but we just always think worst case scenario. So one of the things that I really encourage the people that I work with to do is three things: is to get specific about your fears, to rationalize them, and then to take control of them. So I will literally get somebody that I'm working with to get a piece of A4 paper and divide it into 3 columns. In the first column, what I ask people to do is get specific about what it is that they really don't like about public speaking. It might be a number of things, but what I want you to do is rather, because if you ask somebody, do you like public speaking? No, automatic answer. Why don't you like it? I don't really know. I haven't really thought about it. So I ask people to really think about, why are you scared? What is it about it? Is it that you think you're going to forget your words? Is it that you think you're going to be found out? What is it that scares you? And then in the second column, you want to rationalise that. So you're essentially arguing against that to help reduce that fear down. So things like, has it ever happened to you before? Probably not, you know, or even if it has happened to you before, what was the consequence of that? Because it probably actually wasn't that bad, that serious. You know, how often have you seen it happen to somebody else? So for example, if your fear is kind of forgetting your words, then think about, have you seen somebody else do it where they've been speaking and they've forgotten their words? You probably haven't that often, but also if you have, how did that make you feel about them? Were you really looking at that person going, oh, you've just forgotten your words, that must mean that you know nothing about what you're talking about? Probably what you're actually doing is being a little bit of a cheerleader for them and kind of wishing them well and going, come on, you can get through this, you can get through this. You're probably not thinking badly of them. I would hope if at any point during the rest of my presentation I momentarily forget my words, you're not going to be sat there judging me. I think that's highly unlikely. And therefore, again, we've got to challenge these irrational kind of thoughts that we have. And I think that question I've put in bold is really important. What is the worst that can happen? Because actually the worst that can happen is probably not that bad, even if something goes wrong. So what you're doing is you're arguing that fear, you're reducing it, you're rationalising it. And then in the third column, what you can do is take control of that fear a little bit as well. So try and reduce it even further. So think about, if I did forget my words, what can I have in my back pocket that will help me get through that? So it might be literally going, oh gosh, you know what? I haven't had my coffee today. I'm really sorry. I've lost my way. I'm just going to start that sentence again. So having something in your back pocket that you're going to say that's going to help you get through that. If your fear is something like being asked a question that you can't answer, and that was always a biggie for me, what I would therefore do to create my safety net is, at the beginning of a training course that I was running, I would say to people, do you know what, I think I know quite a bit about this subject, but I don't know everything. There might be a point you ask me a question that I can't answer. I'm not going to blag you, I'm not going to bluff you, but what I will commit to doing is going away and finding the answer for you. And I would even go as far as to putting a piece of whiteboard paper up on the wall and saying, anything I can't answer, I'll record on this piece of paper. What that did was it took the fear away, because it meant if anyone did ask me a question at any point, I could kind of make a joke about it and go, hey, well done, you're the first one that can ask me a question that I don't know the answer to, and pop it onto that piece of whiteboard, without it then me going, oh, well, there you go, there's evidence that I don't know what I'm talking about. And inevitably, 99 times out of 100, you get to the end of the training session, that whiteboard piece of paper would be empty. But by saying that at the beginning, I created myself that safety net. So I was controlling my fear as well. And it's a really good exercise that you can take away and do for yourself to try and minimize some of those fears and take control of them. One of the things that I would really advocate for in terms of challenging those automatic negative thoughts is to keep an evidence bank. Now, this can feel really unnatural, and it can feel really kind of arrogant and egotistical. I think as women, particularly, we're kind of told, not to be overly proud about what we achieve. And if you're anything like me, you always caveat anything you say by, I know this is going to sound a bit arrogant, but, or I don't mean to sound egotistical, but, and we're always a bit apologetic for our successes. But I have an inbox in my email account, which is one that I have given a header that, no, if anyone looked at my inbox, I'd have no idea what was in it. And any good feedback that I get, I put into that inbox. And then what happens is, if I'm ever feeling a bit challenged, or I'm ever feeling a bit uncertain, or I'm ever feeling unconfident or nervous, I will just look in that inbox and remember that I've got the evidence there, that little Janine voice that's still shouting away inside, I've got the evidence to be able to challenge that voice. Because there will be times where it's harder to challenge that voice. The pandemic is a prime example of that. Our resilience and our ability to cope has inevitably been knocked. So actually challenging our inner critic might be harder, because our mental health might have had a kick in. We might not be eating as well as we could be, might not be getting as much exercise, might be isolated, might be drinking a little bit too much gin. All of those things will affect our ability to cope. So those times where I need a little bit more to be able to fight little Janine down, I will look in that inbox at that evidence bank, and that really, really helps me. And I'm really sorry to have to say, but the absolute best way of overcoming a fear is, unfortunately, to face it and realise that it's not as bad as you think it's going to be. There's a really famous book by Susan Jeffers called Face the Fear and Do It Anyway. And I do have a lot of self-help books. I tend to find that they repeat the same thing over and over again, and you actually only need to read the first few pages to get the gist of the book. But essentially what she's saying is, the only way to overcome things, the only way to realise that your worst case scenario is not going to be realised, is by doing it. So if you are somebody that wants to be better at public speaking and wants to do it more often and do it well, then sadly you are going to have to get out and do a bit more of it. And I say that you can do that in a safe way. So gradually exposing yourself to fears. So I would say seek out some opportunities where you can do it safely. So, you know, wish events are a great opportunity, you know, those networking times that you have, you know, that's public speaking, that's speaking out to people that you've never met before. Great opportunities to start. You know, maybe you can ask for a slot in your team meeting where you know everybody and hopefully they're going to be supporting you and cheerleading you. You know, probably not the best to throw yourself straight into getting up on the stage in front of 400 people. Do it gradually. As I said, I still fight inner demons now. And one of the things I found really hard when I went self-employed was being visible. So putting myself out there. But of course, that's the only way to garner business and gather interest. And one of the things that I do is a weekly newsletter. And at the beginning, absolutely petrified that people would be reading what I'd written on a piece of paper. And I had a coach and she was like, you know, the only way you're going to overcome this is by sending that newsletter out and by realizing that you're not going to get negative feedback and that people are going to be grateful for what you're sharing. And I can say now, kind of 10 months down the line, that I am sending a newsletter out every week without fail, that rather than it now taking me 3 hours to hit the send button, which it literally was, I hit that send button and it just goes out and I don't think twice about it. And that is only because I've just kept exposing myself to the thing that was fearful. And you get there, but you have to put yourself out there to show yourself that it's not as scary as you think it's going to be. So I'm really conscious of time. I just want to share another picture, which I have absolutely no idea why I share some of these photos because they're not particularly flattering. But I guess I just wanted to say that sometimes it can go wrong. You know, you're not going to hit that 100% amazing, you know, public speaking session every time. It can go wrong. And this for me was a prime example of where it did go wrong. That's me looking awful, I have to say, and that's Ian Duncan-Smith, who's a Tory MP. This was about 18 months ago now, and I received a call about 11 o'clock to say, we really need someone to go on lunchtime national ITV news, will you do it? And I said, yes, okay, no problem. I was in my pyjamas, I hadn't showered, I had no makeup on, literally the fastest I possibly could to get ready, in the taxi to the TV studios, thinking about the subject that I was going to be asked about. Got into ITV News Studios in Birmingham. It was what's called a down the line interview. So the interview was taking place in London and I was in Birmingham. So I was literally in the middle of this office with everyone working around me. I was on this tiny stage with a camera in front of me and a chair and, you know, an earpiece. And I was just looking down a camera. I couldn't see the person interviewing me. I couldn't see anything that was going on in the studio in London. We did all the prep. It was all working absolutely fine. People could hear me. I could hear them. Wonderful. Went live and nothing. I heard not a dicky bird. And I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know whether the programme had started. I didn't know if I was being asked questions. It was only until afterwards, when I watched the episode back, that I realised that there was pretty much a minute of me looking like this on ITV National News, because what had happened is that the connection had gone down from the studio to me. And it was really hard for me because my natural thought process was to beat myself up, was to say, look, here's the evidence that I can't do it. I have not only been made to look a fool, I've been made to look like a fool in front of millions of people on live TV. What I was able to do, though, again, because of the things that I've had to train myself to do, is start challenging that and going, Janine, you were asked to go on telly with like an hour's notice, you got yourself there. It is absolutely clear from watching that interview that something technical had gone wrong. This wasn't about me freezing. This wasn't about me not being able to ask a question. It was absolutely clear that something had gone wrong. And what I had to do is, I said, reframe my thinking, because otherwise this going wrong could have absolutely been the thing that stopped me from ever doing something like this again. So the times where it does go wrong, please don't let that hang over you forevermore, because let's be honest, anybody who watched this interview will have way forgotten about it. The only one that still remembers it is me, and it's my choice whether I continue to beat myself up about it or whether I just go, it happens, and I can take some positives from it. So I'm really conscious that I am using up quite a lot of my time, and I probably need to finish now. There's one slide that I just want to end on, which I'm going to click through to, and it's this one, and it's one that my coach shared with me, and it's actually from Dieter von Teese, which I love. It's, you know, it's not some kind of big philosopher or scientist or whatever. This is Dieter von Teese quote. And I love this because what she says is, you can be the ripest, juiciest peach in the world, and there is still going to be somebody who hates peaches. So what that is saying is, you can be the best possible speaker in the world. You can be engaging. You might have 95% of your audience that absolutely loves and adores you. You can be the best of that you possibly can be. But there are always going to be some people that don't warm to you. And that's okay. You know, I used to be a massive people pleaser and want everybody to like me and everybody to agree with me and everyone to think I was saying the right thing. But what I've also had to learn very much is that no matter how good and how best I can deliver things, there are always going to be some people that I'm just not their peach, and that's okay. And why I wanted to leave you with this is to say that the best that you can possibly be as a public speaker is the best for you, and you just be the best that you can be. You know, you don't need to be speaking in front of 500 people like some of the people that we see in TED Talks. You don't have to be comical and making everybody roll around with laughter. As long as you can get your message over clearly in a way that you're confident with, then that's good enough. So you just be the best that you possibly can be. And I think I'm going to end it there and throw back. Am I going back to Lauren just to see if there's any questions?
Thank you, Janine. I think that was honestly wonderful, and I found it so interesting that it's like a human instinct to naturally think the worst, and that's so true. We always do, don't we?
Yeah.
Felicity, you're looking at the questions, aren't you? Have we got any from anyone yet?
Nothing specifically. One thing I sort of did want to ask Janine was, do you think TED Talks have kind of ruined our own personal expectations for what we can be like as public speakers? So we're all expecting to go on stage and be Simon Sinek and be absolutely, you know, amazing. And
yeah,
is that something? So
yeah, and I think that's very much what I was just trying to get across at the end there, is that not everybody is going to be these, you know, these people are doing public speaking day in, day out as they're living. And you know, while I like to think that I'm relatively good at public speaking, I also know there are lots of people that are better than me. And what I would say is, be comfortable within yourself and don't try and model yourself on other people. So for example, I know that I am not a comedy genius. So if I try and throw jokes in every 2 seconds with my presentation, that's actually going to affect my confidence, because it's really hard to land a joke. Trust me, I know, you know, it is really, really difficult. And the minute you make a joke that you don't get laughter back from, that's going to knock your confidence massively. So don't try and be something you're not. Be the best that you can be. Which is really cheesy and cliche, but it's so true.
Well, it is, it really is.
yeah.
I have one question actually, Janine, and you mentioned that obviously right at the end, and I loved that peach quote, that not everybody's going to like you, but like you, I'm a bit of a people pleaser as well. And what advice would you give really to kind of get over that and move on and not let those things like that bother you?
I think there's something about understanding why you're a people pleaser. So I know very much that my people pleasing comes from that imposter syndrome thing. So, you know, if I need to please people because I want them to trust in me and believe in me and agree with me, etc. So I think sometimes it's about recognizing who you are and why you do certain things, and that can go a long way. But it is just recognizing that there are just always going to be some people that don't get you. And that's okay, because they're not your type of person anyway.
Very, very true. Very true. Have we got any from anyone else?
We've got a question from Natalie, who's saying, does Janine feel that there are more important steps to take to prepare for virtual public speaking versus in person? So Natalie's saying that she's found it harder to prepare alone without distraction from my peers that would otherwise calm my nerves.
Okay, so that's an interesting one. Like, So I think what's being said there is like your usual support networks aren't around to help with some of those kind of inner voices perhaps and those fears. What I would say really is very similar to what Lauren said. I think at the very beginning of the session that I think the support's still out there. It's just about us reaching out. So, you know, if you know what works for you, and let's be honest, if you know what works, you're already half the way there. So if you know that what you need to prepare is support from people around you, then make the time and the opportunity to create those environments still. So, you know, whether that's saying to somebody, can I have a coffee with you over Zoom so I can pick your brain? And I think the thing is at the moment is don't be scared to reach out, because everybody's feeling isolated. And at the moment, like myself, you know, I can only speak for myself, but if someone says, do you mind sparing me 10 minutes for a chat and a coffee? I'm like, yeah, absolutely, because otherwise I won't speak to anyone during the course of the day. So I think it's about creating those opportunities still where we can support each other, but just in a virtual way.
Rebecca's just quickly asked about sort of tradition currently at the moment, sort of traditional job interviews being face to face aren't really sort of happening. So with virtual sort of interviews, any tips for preparation, and I guess as well any tips for interviewers?
Yeah, so I mean, I think for me, the big thing is about, if you were saying about tips for interviewers, I would say, you know, please keep cameras on, because there isn't anything more off-putting than, as I said, speaking to people and not knowing. You know, we talk about communication really as a two-way thing. You know, good communication, if I'm talking to you, I can see that you're nodding, that you might have your head slightly to the side, that you might be leaned in. I can tell by your body language that you're listening to me. If people have got their cameras off, then I'm losing all those engagement cues, and that's really going to knock me off sort of course and really kind of affect my confidence if I don't know that people are engaging with me. I think from a preparation point of view, I think it's just recognising. So you're talking about preparing for a virtual interview. Is that what we're talking about? Yeah. So as the interviewee, how do you prepare for a virtual interview? Yeah. So one of the things that I would say, and actually this counts for virtual and in person, and it was one of the slides that I was going to talk about that I ran out of time, but make sure that you know who the people are that you're talking to. So language and message is so very important. So you want to build a connection with the person that you're talking to. So I knew that before this, I knew the audience were going to be people who are Wish members, so predominantly women, and that if this session had attracted you to sign up, then you're probably thinking from a confidence and nerves point of view, you want to know a bit more about public speaking. So I pitched my presentation in that way, which was I was open about my own challenges, because I knew that I had an audience that would resonate with that would connect to that. And it's absolutely the same. If you're going for an interview, make sure you know who's going to be in that interview room with you. Look on their LinkedIn profiles, perhaps look on corporate websites. What's the language they use on their websites? And can you embed some of that language into what you're talking about? How can you build that connection?
Cool. We've got a few more questions, but again, I'm sort of conscious of time. So Melissa's asked about what opportunities are there on a virtual platform to be more engaging than face to face, and what can make you stand out? And I think we're sort of covering that with the preparation side of it. But...
yeah, and the other thing that I would say is be realistic with what you can do on a virtual platform. So I tried to deliver a training course last week that perhaps didn't go as well, because I tried to do everything, like, you know, belts and braces, whistles and fanfares and whatever, breakout rooms, whiteboards, you know, interactive polling, and I just don't have the IT capability to really pull those things off. So I would say work within the means of what you can do. I think things like, if you're giving a presentation, you know, slides can be really powerful. Imagery is a really powerful. So we've all heard of the expression death by PowerPoint. You know, put some pictures in there rather than just words. You know, I sometimes, if I'm doing training, I'll play video clips, but I'll do it from things that I think are going to resonate. So I did some training where I used things like clips from Friends. You know, I made the reference to Friends in my presentation. It was a relevant point, but it just built the interest and that engagement in terms of the people listening.
Cool. Should we we move on?
Yeah, yeah. I
I'm just
suppose,
very
yeah,
conscious
you're
of
right.
time,
There
but
is, we are conscious of time, I suppose.
yeah.
There's always the floor. We can open the floor at the end for a couple more questions if anyone has some more. But yeah, I suppose we should move on over to Kim. So Kim, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. How do I follow that? Okay. Right, let's get these slides up first and foremost. Right, hopefully everyone can see that. I need Lauren to nod again at me. Yay, good. Thumbs up and a nod. That's a bonus. Okay, well, good afternoon now, everybody. Again, thank you for letting me come along today and have a chat with you. For those of you that I haven't met before, I'm Kim Newman. I'm the Managing Director of a small consultancy called PML. And we focus on two things. We focus on performance improvement of organisations, and we also focus on creating or fixing collaborative relationships. A bit like Janine, we work predominantly with housing associations, local authorities, but we also do some work with the private sector in the facilities management and commercial property world. What I would say before I get into my slides is looking at the picture of, 7 or 8 year old Janine really took me back to when I first started in the sector, or even in the industry. I was a trainee surveyor back in the day, and in 1990 or thereabouts, as I started, I was the first female trainee surveyor that my practice at the time had employed. And to say that was challenging amongst a load of grey-haired middle-aged men was certainly fascinating, and was an experience that I often recount. But it was interesting because it was an environment that was very good at really knocking your confidence completely, because clearly you're a female, we've never had one before, you can't be any good at what you're doing. And it did have a negative effect for a while, but actually what it did was spark the anger in me, I think, and make me absolutely certain that what I would do is prove myself and qualify and become a bloody good surveyor. And ever since then, I think I've had a similar reaction to things. I've had that similar initial dip for something new and thinking, oh, a bit like, can I do this? Is it okay? And then I've come back out the other side to say, actually, do you know what? Yes, I can. And I echoed with so much of what Janine said. It was extraordinary. I still have moments where I lack in confidence. I still get nervous. I was nervous before this. I like to think nerves mean that you care, as well as the fact that if you don't get nerves, you're not normal. I think that's the important thing to say. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. So taking it into a slightly different direction, then we're going to talk about collaboration with confidence, and this is all about us working together as team members, as team leaders, or as leaders generally of an organisation, and how we can use collaboration to build confidence, if you like, in how we do that.
Kim, sorry to interject. Is it potentially possible for you to just make it a slideshow so everyone can see the slides a bit better?
Apologies.
Okay.
There you go.
There you go. Thank you.
There you go. We talk about feedback on this. Remembering to press the button would be a good starting point. So yeah, very much similar lines to what Janine was talking about earlier on. I can't do it. What on earth is confidence all about? But it is fundamentally the ability inside all of us to know that we can do something, whatever that something is, and have the sort of reference points to remind us when we're going through periods of doubt. And we'll all do that, as Janine rightfully said. We'll all have moments where we can't remind ourselves initially why we've agreed to do this. Was this a good idea? And then something will bring us back to show us, actually, yes, we are good enough, and yes, actually, we should be here today. And it's no different when you're going through a period of collaboration and building relationships with people. Is this the right thing to do? Can I do this? Or actually, is it the wrong thing to do? And it was very interesting, actually, looking at some data. And I know that data is taken in multiple different ways, but some general data I was looking at the start of this process of creating the presentation. And there is a gender confidence gap, and quite often, if you look at how men are employed, they're employed on their drive, their enthusiasm, their ambition, their ability to push forward. if you look at often how women are employed by organisations, it's based on their past performance. And that goes into how we're perceived sometimes when we go into, you know, business relationships or team relationships. There is a natural, generally, not every time of course, but generally a natural view that men are always prone to elaborating, shall we say, perhaps expanding on reality, really pushing themselves forward and being very confident in doing so. But with women, we're the opposite. We tend to undermine ourselves. We tend to be less confident. So if we're going into relationships in a business world, quite often we may feel on the back foot. We may feel that perhaps, you know, if it's predominantly male, that they have the driving force. And it does make us feel uncomfortable sometimes in the way in which we have to deliver our work on a day-to-day basis. So, you know, how can collaboration help us with that? What are the things we need to know and understand if we're trying to collaborate with people? And I think at the moment in housing, let's be honest, we're probably in the most collaboration driven period that I've seen for a very long time. And if you look at this quote from, you know, Dame Judith Hackett, you know, we need to maintain the spirit of collaboration and partnership in a sector that is excessively fragmented. We've seen during the course of this review a will to work together to deliver consistent solutions. This will be especially important going forward to change culture. And actually, I couldn't agree more. We're in an environment now where we're really beginning to realise that for all sorts of reasons, we are going to have to work together very differently. We're economically challenged. You know, we are challenged from the point of view of safety, in terms of delivery, in terms of programmes of work, in terms of capacity of resources, full stop. So we're in a time where we do have to learn to work together in a very different way, whether that's internal teams working side by side, or whether it's in fact relationships with external third parties, contractors, etc. So we're at the cusp of, albeit a very difficult time for the sector and for the country as a whole. We actually are starting to see some really positive changes coming forward. And if you look at how you can create collaboration and build confidence, what we've found is that there are, you know, 8 things that we can do, and we'll talk about some of this, to really do that. And if first one is leadership commitment. If we are all in leadership positions in different ways, be it teams, be it, you know, departments, be it organisations, if we set out the commitment to work in a specific way, it creates the ability for us to cascade that through an organisation and build that following of that approach. We can put in place the ability for us to build trust, which is key in a collaborative world. And critically, we need to learn to share feedback, but in a productive and acceptable way. Quite often, it's quite interesting, really, listening again to one of the points that Janine made about, you know, how we can have that fight or flight feeling. And when it comes to confrontation, that is one of the most categoric moments where people have that fight or flight feeling. I don't want to face up to someone. I don't want to, you know, confront them about a difficult thing. I don't want to have a difficult conversation. And there really is a lot of fear around that particular area. But we can find ways to work together, but to share that feedback, so we do build confidence and we do it in a sensible way. So we'll have a chat about that. There are some very specific behaviours we all have to learn. It is a different way of working, and there are some tips that we'll talk through as we go through the presentation. We'll also talk about understanding expectations, very key to undermining confidence and relationships. But also refer to the fact that, you know, we need to measure where we're going and how we're progressing. It's a bit like, you know, Janine's special folder in her drive, but, you know, we do need to constantly look at how we're progressing and whether we're doing what we say we're going to do and whether it's being received in the right way. And if it's not, we have to put a little action plan together to rectify that. But critically, we need to continually improve. And if we start to follow these steps, as individuals, we start to operate in a different way, and we start to feel more confident in moving relationships forward. So, you know, not surprisingly, I show people a lot of these pictures, and some of you might have seen them before, but the purpose of this is to talk about perception. And some of you will look at that picture and you may tell me if is it flying towards you or away from you? And undoubtedly there'll be a mixture of opinions in the room, the virtual room, always is. And the same thing will happen if I show you the next one. Some of you will say you can see a rabbit, some of you will say you can see a duck or a bird, and some of you will see both. And that will sound utterly bizarre if we're all intelligent women, which of course we are, and we're all looking at that same picture. How on earth can we possibly see something completely different, or someone see one thing and others see the other? And that's because we sometimes see the same things very differently, and this is part of us understanding the world of perception. Sometimes if we see a duck, for example, or a bird, we've got our answer. We don't need to look at anything else, even if there are other answers available, like a rabbit. So individually we work very differently. Some people are just born to investigate and will want to find that other thing on that picture, but sometimes they won't. And also we can do exactly the same thing, the same task, and we'll get different answers. And the important thing about all of this is it's totally natural. So if we're in a group, and I've seen this sometimes in the workshops that we run, where we'll put some of these things up and there'll be 10 men quite often saying, oh yeah, that's flying towards us. There'll be somebody else that will say no, it's not, and they'll feel like they're embarrassed because they can't see it. They'll feel pressure, peer pressure. They'll feel under pressure from a time perspective because they can't see the same thing as everybody else, and they start to feel silly. And actually, this happens day in, day out in the world of business and in the world of the way we work. The reality is it's natural. There's nothing wrong with it. And the fact that we see things differently is absolutely right. And what we should do is acknowledge our differences. And that's the important thing for me. We need to learn to recognize the differences between us, because they're the things that help us to work together more effectively. We shouldn't be focusing on the negatives because I've seen one thing and you haven't. But that's what perception does. That's the power of perception. And then we talked briefly earlier on about feedback, when Lauren very kindly gave me the feedback that I hadn't had the foresight to press the button on the screen. But feedback is so important, but so often, and not just in housing, but in many sectors, we have a habit of focusing on the 1% or the 5% of things that have gone wrong. What we don't do is spend our time focusing on the 95% or the 91% or whatever of things that have gone absolutely right. We have a propensity to think about the negative and the problem, not as opposed to the thing that's gone well and the thing that we should be celebrating. So again, back to having a box of things to remind you, actually, we've done good work. It's important we do this in our day job as well when we're working with other people, because sometimes we do get a little bit focused on the negative, as I said earlier, and that can be really, really overwhelming if all you're getting is negative feedback when there's so much positive stuff happening. So as part of again of your day-to-day delivery or management or whatever your role may be, I think it's important for you to do exactly as you've described, but have your box of good feedback, because you have to remind yourselves and others, do you know what, we are doing a good job. We are doing what we said we would do. We've had a few problems, but the important thing is how you respond to them. And I think if you run a team, if you manage a team, there's additional pressure on you. Lots of feedback on you. Why haven't you got your team sorted? Why aren't they doing this? Why aren't they doing that? But you have to motivate your team. And it's difficult sometimes to do that when you're sitting there feeling a lot of pressure from other people and you think, okay, great, I've got to now take this and turn it into a positive. But it's an important thing that we have to be able to do. So I would urge you to think about feedback in its broadest sense. Don't be frightened to ask for feedback. Think of it as a gift, and we'll talk a bit more about it, but use it to improve confidence, to be able to then pass that down and motivate team members or colleagues or whoever else. It's really important. And likewise, if you're working with a contractor or otherwise, feed it back to them. You have to learn to celebrate success as well as beat ourselves up about failure. We really do. It's absolutely critical. Don't be defensive, see it as opportunity. And it's a very strange diagram, but this is about the importance of feedback, because at the bottom of this diagram, at step number 1, you know, if you think about a bit like learning to drive, really, we're completely incompetent. Our hands and feet don't know what they're doing, you know, and all of a sudden, as you get sit with an instructor, this element of awareness suddenly washes over us. We think, oh yeah, if we do these things in order, this car moves. And you think, fantastic. So then you get to a point when you jump up to step 2, where you can move the car, and you're very conscious of what you're doing. You know, you're really overplaying your feet and your hands and looking in mirrors and stuff like that. And you have to learn to adapt to the feedback you're getting all the way through with your little instructor. And it hurts sometimes because you think you're doing really well, or you might fail your test. But actually, do you know what? It's important. It's the way we learn and progress. And when you've got up to step 3, you've got your test, you know, you've passed your test, you're doing really well. That's fantastic. But then we get to a point sometimes where when you get to step 4, you're doing some things that actually you shouldn't be doing. You know, in the world of driving, it might be you're crossing your hands, or you're speeding, or you're doing naughty things like writing a text. Preferably not. Don't advocate that. But it happens in the world of work as well. Sometimes you don't realise you're doing something. You really don't, because you become unconscious of that particular thing. And you can get complacent. We all do that. But the only way you find out that you're doing that is you get feedback from somebody else, feedback from a group that tells you, actually, do you know what? This isn't working. This needs to change. We've noticed. And that puts you back in a position of realizing that you need to adjust. And this happens day to day and needs to happen day to day. So we all have to get comfortable with feedback if we're going to improve ourselves and you know, be the best that we can be. And I absolutely agree with what Janine was saying. You know, if we get out of bed each morning, no one gets out of bed with a view to doing a bad job. So if we get out of bed each morning and telling ourselves we're going to be the best we can be, we have to be open to receiving feedback. Okay, so this is something we need to learn to get good at, and we need to learn to be able to give it and receive it well, so that we can learn and others can learn. We all move forward. And expectations, well, we do a process in some of our workshops where we're building relationships between different businesses, between, say, a HA and a contractor. And the absolute thing that you find regularly is that we do all have expectations of each other. And I apologise for the big chunks of text, sorry, Janine. But we do have expectations of each other. And most of the time they're not shared. But actually, they're the things we judge each other against. So, you know, you're in an impossible position where you're sitting there being judged by someone when actually you have no idea what it is they're judging you against. How can you win? You're completely in a difficult position. So we have to learn to share this, you know, whether it's a team or it's a partnership or it's a contractual relationship. We have to become better at sharing our expectations, because they're always there. And actually, sometimes they're not always realistic. And so the importance of sharing them is just, particularly in the world we're in now, where we're not together. It's not as if we can just pop our head over the screen and say, what do you mean by that? We're not. So the importance of clarity now is so critical. So I would really encourage that you spend some time thinking about expectations that you might have of others, or possibly thinking about relationships where you need to get clarity on that. And it's very easy to have that conversation, because unless you do that, you could potentially be sitting there in a permanently no-win position, because you have no idea what someone else is judging you against. And the interesting thing is, in terms of employee feedback, in general terms, you know, where there is lots of positive feedback and engagement, there's a 6-to-1 ratio in terms of performance. So it's a far better way of trying to deliver and manage a team, is to have that openness and that transparency about what your expectations are of each other. Okay, but again, it's a difficult conversation potentially that people do not naturally feel they want to have, but it's critical so that you both know exactly where you stand. And so think about, again, feedback is a gift, be it expectations, be it that you're doing things in a different way to the way you were before, but it is based on the current perception. So it's that person's current perception, and it's up to you to change them. So if somebody thinks that, you know, I'm not doing something particularly well, it's their perception at the moment. If I want that to change, I have to change it and show them that I'm doing something better. Okay, but you have to want to do it. It's important that you understand the feedback, and the person giving it to you is absolutely clear and transparent with you as to what they mean. And until you change that perception, it's that other person's reality. And that's what we have to remember every day. Perceptions are someone else's reality. So if we're going to change it, then we have to deliberately do something about it. And sometimes that's very difficult. You could be doing the best job in the world, and actually there's nothing else you can do, but you have to be aware of it, and you have to be able to have a conversation around that. Okay. And we spend a lot of time putting in place some behaviours, and these are things that any team or any leader can put in place. And we have these red-blue behaviours, we call them, and we try and instill these in all of the relationships that we're putting together, or indeed that we're trying to fix. And for a collaborative relationship to work, one-to-one, one-to-many, we need to have proactive language, so red language on the left-hand side, which is all good. We have to be constructive. We have to take risk to an acceptable level, and we have to come at things with solutions. We have to communicate. We have to be really open and inclusive in terms of how we work with people, but importantly, non-confrontational, showing empathy, expecting a bit of a win-win. So if I do this, this will help you, or if we do this, this will help you, and seek to create relationships that thrive and that really want innovation. And typically where these behaviours are demonstrated, and when we take these on board, they're very successful. And actually you feel, as someone who leads teams, you feel much more in control and much more self-confident. But what it does mean is you have to be, to some degree, a bit vulnerable. Because you have to be transparent, you have to share, you have to get that sort of working relationship. You do have to be prepared to be vulnerable. But if any of you ever listen to the fantastic Brené Brown, and I spend hours, she's fantastic. What you learn from her very quickly is that being vulnerable takes courage, actually, and but the outcomes of it are so beneficial. But it is a different way of managing and working with people. What we don't want to be is in the blue side of that sheet. We don't want to be, and I keep doing this, it's ridiculous really. This is like I'm in a room with you where I'll be flapping my hands about as normal, but I do them in front of a screen now. But typically we want to avoid behaviours where we're being reactive or obstructive or too risk averse. We certainly want to avoid blame. We don't want any of that especially in the environment we're in, we can't have that. And also we don't want to be in a situation where we're not communicating. And as we are currently, clearly we're all reliant on electronic tools, systems, software, etc., to communicate with each other. But what we really have to make sure we do to have a successful collaborative relationship is not rely on email. I've had to put a few relationships back on track in the last few months where there's been that sudden reversion to email. And what happens? We all get things out of proportion. We get them wrong. We misunderstand. The tone is wrong. And we end up with a snowball effect because we just start ping-ponging really snotty emails to each other. And actually, do you know what? Pick the phone up, have one of these meetings. 5 minutes of that's far more productive than 5 minutes of snowballing emails. And I can't really overemphasize that enough. We need to avoid silos. So we need to become that broader, more inclusive team. Avoid confrontation, avoid being self-centered. So, being collaborative is you're focused on an objective, a team objective, a personal objective, whatever it may be. But it's not all about you. It's about the other people you're working with. It's about how you can help them, how they can help you is a consequence. It's about that sort of reciprocal relationship. But we don't just want to be thriving. We don't just want to be in a sort of old-fashioned traditional relationship. We've gone past that. And the leaders that we want to see today, and we are seeing today, aren't interested in that. We work very differently, and we want to be in the red side of that sheet. We want to be working in a much more dynamic and collaborative way, and we want to make people feel that everything that they bring to the table is important. We want to make them feel included, And we want to acknowledge the differences that people have and why that makes a team a fantastic thing to be part of. You know, if we want to talk about how this gets put into practice, very simply, we have to model the behaviours we want to see. So if we want reciprocal behaviour, then we have to do the same. And, you know, it is a different way of working. You do have to be patient. We don't all switch on today and say we're going to be really collaborative. It takes time, and some people will be more comfortable with this way of working than others, and that's fine. And interestingly, but probably not surprisingly, when it comes to this style of working, women are often a lot more successful at it. Why? Because we're often a lot more emotionally intelligent. We're a lot more switched on. We are ambitious, but without being overly driven by competitiveness. Okay, so we, you know, that's a generality, but typically they are the sorts of ways that we behave. So we're actually a lot more open to being a reciprocal sort of partnership. That's fine for us. We want, you know, we expect that, and we would expect the do unto others as you would have them unto you. Generally, that's sort of what makes us work. However, if we're not getting behaviours we would like to see, if we're not getting the sorts of positive things, we have to be fully prepared to challenge and to push back, but in an appropriate way. And why do you do that? Because if you feed that back, then the behaviours start to change. So, you know, it's not about keeping the peace and someone just falling in line. It's about having a difficult conversation and giving the right feedback at the right time in a measured way. It's also, though, acknowledging when someone has been very, very open and acknowledged that sort of behaviour and have changed and have realised, actually, yeah, do you know what, that was wrong, and there's a reason for that. Critically, we mustn't hold grudges, and we have to then be forgiving, and that will build the trust on an ongoing basis. Critically, though, we all have to be clear and consistent. You know, we all have a habit sometimes of going slightly off script. If we're going to do this properly, we need to be consistent. Same hymn sheet, same script, articulated in whichever way works for our teams. Pictures are often good. I like pictures. But we have to test it. We have to test that understanding and be proactive to make sure that people are following and understanding what we're doing, why we're doing it, but actually have the psychological safety to say, I don't understand, or I don't feel comfortable, and be able to come to us. You know, and that's a big advantage of us being more approachable, more emotionally aware, is to make sure there is that comfortable feeling within our teams and groups. People can do that. And clearly, if we can put things in the same format, all so much the better. But critically is about that win-win position. You know, we're not all about winning for ourselves, we're about winning for the team or the project or the objective or the business plan that we're all focused on. So we've all got to be able to win in whichever way works for us. And sometimes that's not even, sometimes it's not equal, but actually whatever we need to happen, you know, in terms of who wins for this particular thing, who wins for that, we need to understand what each party is looking to achieve, and we need to help each other to get there. We'll get there a lot quicker if we work together. And, you know, I'd hate to say that the bit at the bottom, because it's a bit Brexit-like, but, you know, no deal is a better deal. We want to have a deal between us that works for both parties. And if one of us isn't getting some sort of equal benefit, then we're not working in the way that we should be. And when we're talking about issues, and this is, you know, some of the difficult conversation stuff that we were talking about earlier on, we must be constructive, and we have to separate the person from the issue. We really must. So when we're talking to someone and having that conversation, the reason we can feel more confident is because we're not having a personal attack at someone. We're not feeling we have to do that. We're focusing on the problem and the issue we've got at hand. And that means that we can go into those sorts of difficult conversations without the fear and the dread that we might otherwise have. You know, oh God, it's Kim again, and she's going to be really upset and emotional. No. We're going to be constructive, and we're going to say that Kim keeps forgetting to press the button on the bottom of her PowerPoint presentations, and it really would be better if she didn't do that. And I'll say, yeah, you're absolutely right. I've only doing this every day for the last 7 or 8 months. Why wouldn't I have done that? So then we focus very hard on the issue, and we then have more time for empathy for the person. And that means we focus on the interests, not each other's position, and we have an ability then to influence that person and come out of a difficult conversation with a sensible outcome. And they have to be willing to understand, but they'll understand a lot better if we're coming at them in a really constructive way and it doesn't feel like a personal attack. And critically, you know, we have to communicate. Can't emphasize it enough. Communicate again. The crux of all this is being open and honest, and having the ability to, as I say, reflect that vulnerability, to reflect that openness we need, and have the courage to do that. But knowing that you've got that broader objective that you're aiming to achieve, that your team are working behind you and with you, and that you've got the ability to have difficult conversations with them, and that will build significant trust in that relationship. And it's a bit like, you know, our own relationships in our own lifetime. You know, being open, honest, and reliable with anyone is always going to produce a much better outcome. And if we all want to constantly get better and strive for that continuous improvement, then the feedback will be received positively. And here we are, regular feedback. So regular, open, honest feedback is key. As I say, it must be constructive and actionable. There is no point in giving someone feedback they can't do anything with. So if you ever get feedback that's absolutely useless, push back and say, I'm sorry, what do you mean? How can I, you know, can we be a bit more explicit? What can I do with that? And often the informal feedback is the most helpful. You know, what used to be the chat by the water cooler or in the kitchen making a cup of tea, you know, quite often the chat over Zoom, having a general chinwag and a catch up is actually really helpful. You don't have to constantly sit in a formal environment, but structured feedback in terms of, you know, your one-to-ones, your team meetings, your general interaction is important. But as one of my esteemed colleagues always says, you can't solve a problem you don't know that you've got. And again, that links back into expectations. If no one feeds through to you through feedback that something isn't happening, you won't know they had that expectation of you necessarily in the first place. So it's all about trying to join up the dots in terms of people working together. So how does it build confidence? How can collaboration build confidence? It can create a common objective and outcome. So you can bring everyone together, and that is enormous typeface. I do apologise for that. But you can come together focused on one thing as a team, as a couple, as a business, and it will focus everyone's attention on that. So we're all pulling in the same direction. And we can recognise everyone's value, which is really important. Everyone's got a contribution to make, and they need to see that that contribution is important and where it fits in that process. It naturally creates a team environment. So, you know, we're all pulling together, and that's really comforting and supportive. And then we certainly need that generally, but certainly now. And it creates that ability to have clear and thoughtful communication where we actually think a bit about the person, how they're going to receive it, what way that should be written, and actually how in reality that should be conveyed, not on an email, face to face, or box to box as we are at the moment, screen to screen. So it encourages that sharing, openness and transparency that is so key. And you know, for those of us that get excited about new and different things on a regular basis, and to be fair, this sector is very dynamic, being creative and innovative, you know, working together and looking at different things and how we can pool our views and thoughts and do things better is fantastic. It really does get you up in the morning and get you excited. But it enables us also to show empathy in difficult or otherwise situations and understand the other person's perspective. Certainly encourages active listening, and anyone that's heard me talk before will say, you know, she always says you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a purpose, but that's absolutely true, you know. But having the ability to listen as opposed to just hear and really put that into practice is important, and this helps you to do that. But, you know, again, we also focus then on solutions. We don't turn up and say, Lauren, I've got a problem, and dump that problem. We turn up and say, there's a problem, but I've got an idea about how we can solve it. And so this completely changes the way in which we work together and how we can develop and move forward. Nice picture. I had to put a picture in, and I won't sing the theme tune from the cartoons, but that was all I was going to say. Otherwise, I'll be here all day. I'm happy to take any questions, really, if there are any.
Thank you, Kim. That was honestly, that was fantastic. Thank you. You've made some really good points there. Does anyone have any questions then for Kim?
We've had a few come through.
Yeah.
One of the points about perceptions and how we all see things differently. Can anything be attributed to fact? And as such, is one person right? So
that's an interesting question, actually.
Yes.
Two guesses where you think that one came from, Kim.
I couldn't possibly think where that might have come from, Melissa. In reality, sometimes, yes, one person can be right. And particularly, you know, those of us that spend time looking at figures and commercial stuff, there is often a situation where one person could be right because we're pored over a spreadsheet. However, the bit that always comes out in those sorts of discussions is the interpretation. There's always the room for two people to interpret things differently. But until you have that sensible conversation, you actually don't realise that actually that person was right, because you've got that sort of unspoken interpretation. We're all renowned for that when we get in the world of Excel, aren't we?
Yeah.
Hopefully that's sorted Melissa's question.
And another question about managing other people's expectations of you and work without causing conflict.
Okay. I mean, I would really I was talking to someone the other day actually about this. I would really advocate, be it one-to-one relationships or otherwise, I think it's really important at the start of something or something new or a change that you take some time to just have half an hour and say, well, okay, how's this going to work? What would you normally expect? How would you like to work? What was your expectation? And really have that discussion, because it's an important way of then setting a base for that particular relationship. And to be honest, quite often it's really welcomed, because you know, people don't often take the time to ask about what someone else might like in that way. So it gives you a chance to build a different starting point, and also you can measure that. So if we put this in a contractual sense, we do that for both clients and contractors, and we'll have them setting expectations for each other, and they score them, and we go back and we check them and we say, how are you getting on? And that's actually one of the key ways of measuring progress, and it's created some of the most frank relationships that I've seen in quite some time. So I would really just say, set some time and have that conversation.
Would you think there's potentially as women maybe because we do naturally work like this, and as I like the point you were saying about us having greater emotional intelligence and such, that sometimes we might take too much on in this sort of in a collaborative relationship and be sort of doing all the work to an extent. I can't think of a better way to word it. You know what I mean? And how do we, I guess, maybe set our own expectations, or set what try not to be superwoman maybe, or
well, yeah, I think you're right. We can sometimes take on board quite a lot, and doing that, actually, it depends on the situation obviously, but in general terms we do have a tendency to do that. But I think what we have to remember is if for example we're taking things on ourselves because someone's struggling or is having difficulty, if we take this on ourselves, are we actually helping that person? Would it be better for us to spend time sitting down with them, going through whatever it is and helping them to develop and understand? Or would it be better for us to put that person with somebody else, talk something through? I think it's about the nature of the problem sometimes. And we are, I can talk for myself, but sometimes you do naturally take something on because you feel it's the right thing to do, but actually you're not helping the other person necessarily, because you're taking away something actually it would help them and help them build their confidence to learn or to understand or develop in. So I think you have to question yourself a little bit, and it's back to your point around your own expectations. We all know ourselves quite well, and I think we've got to be prepared to say, actually, what are we prone to doing? What do we need to hold ourselves to account for? And then what do we need to hold our colleagues or our peers accountable for? And just take a step back and reflect before we automatically grab hold of whatever it is. That tends to work quite well. It's just that little voice in the back of your head. It's not being negative this time. It's just waving a little flag saying, actually, should you do this? So That would be my suggestion.
Do we have any more questions, Felicity?
I think that's all of them.
Had some great comments in the chat.
Yeah.
Sandra put active listening, it's so powerful. Melissa put really fantastic presentation, and Kim, I think overall everybody's really enjoyed this, so thank you so much. And Janine as well,
Pleasure.
both of you have been fantastic.
Pleasure.
Yeah. Oh, we've got one new message. I don't know if this is another question. No, it's just thanks. So unless anybody has any more, unless anyone has any more, I suppose, yeah, this is the end. So thank you so much. It's been really, really good today. So thank you. Yeah. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for joining. I hope you really enjoyed it as much as we did. Like I said at the beginning of just before we joined, please reach out. Let us know what you're interested in, what you'd like us to talk about moving forward. And we're not just an organisation to bring everyone together, we're also a support network. So please feel free to reach out. And yeah, it's been brilliant. So thank you so much. Yeah. Abby's just put, can she have our contact details? Absolutely. What we'll do is we'll share around a newsletter with all of our members, and then our contact details will be shared on that as well. So yeah, you can use that and you can reach out to us. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, well, take care, everybody.